Good afternoon. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in South Korea at a time of deepening military ties between Russia and North Korea. He is set to meet President Yoon and Foreign Minister Park Jin, with that topic likely to be discussed. Ji has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived at the Osan Air Base in South Korea at about 9:30 p.m. on Wednesday, after taking part in a G7 foreign ministers meeting in Tokyo. This is Blinken's first visit to Seoul since President Yoon took office in May last year. The top U.S. diplomat is scheduled to meet with President Yoon before sitting down for a meeting with his South Korean counterpart Park Jin. Blinken's visit comes at a time of geopolitical instability amid the ongoing war in Ukraine and the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Before heading to South Korea and Japan, he told reporters regarding his trip that the U.S. is equally engaged in both vital work in the Indo-Pacific region and the crisis in Gaza. While he's in Seoul, measures to prevent further North Korean arms cooperation with Russia are expected to top the agenda, as well as ways to strengthen security and economic cooperation between Seoul and Washington. Ways to cooperate with China to deal with issues on the Korean Peninsula could also be discussed ahead of the highly anticipated summit between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping in San Francisco next week. Blinken plans to head to India after wrapping up his trip to Seoul. Ji, Arirang News.
The United States has reaffirmed its commitment to remaining ready for contingencies on the Korean Peninsula. During a briefing on Wednesday, U.S. National Security Coordinator John Kirby made the remarks as he responded to concerns that Washington's focus on wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East might weaken its commitment to Indo-Pacific security. The official highlighted the Seoul-Washington alliance, adding that President Biden is dedicated to fulfilling security commitment to South Korea, including additional military training and also maintaining a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific area. Israeli forces say Hamas has lost control of Northern Gaza, prompting thousands of Palestinians to flee. Now, as they press on with their offensive targeting Hamas's tunnels, the U.S. continues to seek a humanitarian pause for hostages to be released. Yi has more.
According to Israel's military spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, during a televised briefing on Wednesday, Hamas has lost control of northern Gaza as thousands of Gazans have moved south. The spokesperson said some 50,000 Palestinians moved from the northern Gaza Strip to the south, adding that they're moving because they understand that Hamas has lost control in the north. While Hagari reiterated the government's stance that there will be no ceasefire, he said Israel has been allowing humanitarian pauses at specific times to allow Gazans to relocate south. In a press release also on Wednesday, the Israel Defense Forces claimed it had destroyed 130 Hamas tunnel shafts as it continues with its air and ground operations in Gaza. According to the statement, combat engineers fighting in Gaza are destroying Hamas's weapons and are locating, exposing, and detonating tunnel shafts. Meanwhile, the U.S. is closely discussing with Israel and Qatar a proposal for a pause in fighting in Gaza of up to 3 days, which will allow the delivery of more humanitarian aid and the possible release of some hostages held by Hamas. While Israel has made it clear that a humanitarian ceasefire would only come if the Palestinian militant group releases all 240 hostages, a senior Arab source familiar with the discussions said there was hope that a deal could still be reached, adding that the parties involved are at a critical stage of the negotiations. A diplomat briefed on the matter said that a pause of 1 to 3 days could allow the release of 10 to 15 hostages and also give Hamas time to gather information of the identities and locations of all the hostages in order to secure the release of dozens more. Yi, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, there is growing attention on who will govern Gaza after the war. Israel says it has no plans to reoccupy Gaza as the U.S. once again warns against Israel's reoccupation. Our Choi Soo-hyung reports.
The U.S. State Secretary Antony Blinken on Wednesday local time said that Gaza cannot be occupied by Israel again. At a news conference after a G7 foreign ministers meeting in Tokyo, he also added that it's clear that authority over the governance of the Gaza Strip should be run by Palestinian residents.
When it comes to post-conflict governance in Gaza, a few things are clear and necessary. One, Gaza cannot be continue to be run by Hamas. That simply invites a repetition of October 7th, and Gaza used as a place from which to launch terrorist attacks. It's also clear that Israel cannot occupy Gaza.
On Tuesday, Washington once again warned against Israel's reoccupation of Gaza following Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments that Israel will have indefinite overall security responsibility for the Gaza Strip. U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby also said it's quite plausible for the Israeli military to remain in the Gaza Strip for a while after the war for follow-up measures, but the U.S. is firmly against a long-term reoccupation. On the same day, Reuters reported that Israel has no plans to reoccupy the Gaza Strip. An unnamed senior Israeli official stated that Israel has no intention of reoccupying or governing Gaza for an extended period. Furthermore, Israel emphasized that the ongoing operations in the Gaza Strip are effective and will continue, and they are not open-ended. Israel clarified that its military involvement is aimed at dismantling Hamas's terrorism and threats, but even after the military operations are complete, there will be a need for gradual measures against Hamas infrastructure. The Israeli government also said it's too early to talk about the next step scenarios for governance of the Gaza Strip, and their current operation is focusing on completely eradicating Hamas. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Today, November 9th, is National Firefighters Day in South Korea. The day symbolizes the emergency services hotline number 119. Marking the occasion at Yongsan Children's Garden in Seoul, President Yoon said firefighters raised South Korea's global status after displaying dedication and a sense of unity in response to a deadly earthquake in Turkey and wildfires in Canada. Yoon said firefighters were dispatched to 130 emergency sites across South Korea last year, rescuing 110,000 people. He said a nation with brave firefighters is a safe nation, adding that appreciating them makes a nation truly healthy. The president also called on his cabinet to accelerate supplying the fire agency with improved technology. Some 1,000 firefighters, as well as representatives from the embassies of Turkey and Canada, attended the event. A recent report by the Bank of Korea shows most major investment banks expect the U.S. Federal Reserve to end its rate hike campaign. The BOK's New York office surveyed 12 investment banks, with 10 saying they expect the benchmark rate to stay in the 5.25 to 5.5% range. The other two banks projected a hike to the 5.5 to 5.75% range. The Federal Reserve has recently kept its key short-term interest rate unchanged, with Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell suggesting the FOMC is edging closer to the end of its rate hiking campaign. South Korea's biggest startup festival, COMEUP 2023, is underway. More than half of the participating startups came from overseas, providing a networking platform for domestic startups seeking to go global. Our Lee Soo-jin has more.
South Korea is ready for its startups to make their mark. The country's biggest startup festival, COMEUP 2023, which will be held across 3 days, kicked off on Wednesday under the slogan, "We Move the World." Now in its 5th year, COMEUP, hosted by the Ministry of SMEs and Startups, is focusing on helping startups expand into global markets and providing them with various business opportunities. For the first time ever, most of the participating startups, 60% in fact, are from overseas. Continuing the global networking drive that began with President Yoon's state visit to the Middle East, global startups from 35 countries will be in attendance, including a 180-member delegation from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. To accommodate them all, there's a separate global zone set up, a new addition for this year. It stages company booths and country pavilions allow domestic startups to network and pitch to companies and officials from across the world. This year's COMEUP also features select local startups from various stages of development, giving them a platform to showcase their products. The festival also provides them with various opportunities for mentorship, networking, and investment. Arirang News sat down with the Minister of SMEs and Startups. She told us that this festival will highlight the strengths of South Korean startups.
South Korean startups are being recognized for their superior technology. For instance, in this year's CES, a quarter of the Innovation Award honorees were South Korean startups. In a digital era when new technology and businesses are needed, South Korean startups are already garnering much attention.
Also, this year's festival provides opportunities for startups to win what they need the most: capital.
At this year's COMEUP, there are 160 venture capitals from both Korea and abroad in attendance.
The minister added that she hopes that this festival will pave the way for more local startups to expand their business internationally, which will also help avoid business competition in the domestic market. 이수진, Arirang News.
South Korea's International Press Awards, the Hinzpeter Awards, honor journalists devoted to telling stories of truth through a camera lens. This year, the top prize was given to 4 video journalists who covered the opposition movements facing Russia's Vladimir Putin regime. Song Yujin reports.
These works have been recognized for their remarkable documentation of history from the front lines. They are the winners of this year's Hinzpeter Awards. Named after German video journalist Jürgen Hinzpeter, who filmed and reported South Korea's May 18th democratization movement, these awards celebrate video journalists dedicated to truth, human rights, and justice.
It often feels like we focus solely on the casualties and negotiations of the Russian-Ukraine war. This year's projects shed light on the voices opposing the war and have effectively portrayed the suffering of countless civilians impacted by the conflict.
The top prize, the World at a Crossroads Award, was given to the documentary Inside Russia, Putin's War at Home. It was made by a team of 4 video journalists who risked imprisonment as they covered domestic criticism of the Vladimir Putin regime, the opposition movements against the Ukraine war, and the demand for press freedom and free expression.
Sometimes your voice can be not heard, and it can be very lonely and isolating. But it's still worth it to stand by what you believe and stand for the democratic values.
The Battle of Bakhmut, the winner in the news category, shows what life is like in one of Ukraine's most dangerous battlegrounds. The 3 journalists capture the harsh realities of war through the lives of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians during their 2-week stay in the city.
When something is that dire, when the situation is that dangerous, I think that's when journalism comes in, and that's some of the times it's most important for us to be there to show the reality of what's happening.
The award for features went to Russian soft power in the CAR, where 2 journalists carried on the works of their colleagues who lost their lives while investigating the Wagner mercenary group in the Central African Republic 5 years ago. Just like Hinzpeter, these visual storytellers continue to illuminate the untold stories of our time, ensuring that the voiceless are heard and the world bears witness to their struggles. 송유진, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In the U.S. on Tuesday, voters headed to the polls to decide state initiatives and referendums during off-year elections. The night delivered some historic wins, including a pro-choice victory in Ohio. Ohio voters approved a constitutional amendment that will enshrine access to abortion in state law. In the nation's only race to include abortion on the ballot, it became the 7th state to guarantee abortion access, considered a considerable victory since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade last year. And Ohio also became the 24th state in the U.S. to legalize marijuana, for recreational use. The results, which also include Virginia's Democratic governor staying in office, as well as the Democrats taking full control of Kentucky's State House, are good news for Democrats amid poor approval numbers for President Joe Biden. Malaysia's leader, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, told the parliament on Tuesday that Malaysians should unanimously back the Palestine cause, including maintaining ties with the militant group Hamas. On Tuesday's parliamentary session, the Prime Minister's reaffirmation of his support for Palestine came as a response to a proposal by the U.S. to sanction Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad's foreign supporters. He also urged media outlets to avoid describing Hamas fighters as militants, saying Hamas holds the same values as Nelson Mandela's African National Congress, which fought against apartheid in South Africa. Malaysia, a Muslim-majority nation, does not recognize Israel as a country and has maintained the position that no diplomatic relations will commence until a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine is secured. In Indonesia, former Communication and Information Technology Minister Johnny G. Plate has been sentenced to 15 years by the country's anti-graft court on Wednesday. The former cabinet minister was found guilty of corruption linked to the construction of mobile and internet transmission towers in rural parts of Indonesia. He was fined around $64,000 and ordered to reimburse the country for its losses to the tune of around $1 million. Prosecutors alleged that from a $533 million procurement project, the ex-minister pocketed around $1.2 million by turning a blind eye to feasibility studies on construction sites. Plate is the fifth former minister from President Joko Widodo's administration to have been sentenced for corruption. King Charles III, Britain's reigning monarch, got a taste of Korea as he visited Europe's largest Koreatown on Wednesday. In the first official visit by a member of the royal family, the visit follows a special mention of Korean President Yoon's state visit in the King's speech on Tuesday. Home to the largest population of Koreans in Europe, New Malden residents prepared a celebration of Korean food and culture, including traditional attire hanbok, as well as putting on performances for the king. 2023 marks 140 years of diplomatic relations between the two nations. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. The early winter chill is taking a short break today before returning with colder air tomorrow. Then sub-zero morning temperatures await us this weekend. As much as we wish we could enjoy today's warm temperatures, perhaps the warmest we're going to have in a while, it's going to be rather cloudy with rain. Rain starts from central regions this afternoon, gradually spreading to the southern parts of the country and Jeju by tonight. Jeju could see up to 50 millimeters. The rest of the country could see 5 to 30 millimeters into Friday. Meanwhile, those in the southern provinces, especially in Gyeongsang-do provinces, could enjoy sunnier skies during the day. So please do so if you can, with highs going to the 20s this afternoon. Seoul tops out at 17 degrees, Daejeon at 20 degrees this afternoon. Looking ahead to next week, don't worry, we're not skipping right into the winter. Things will warm up by the middle of next week, but do take out your winter clothes from your wardrobe this weekend. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Israeli forces are now in the next phase of their offensive in Gaza. After mass airstrikes, they're now targeting the underground tunnels, going after Hamas commanders and fighters. Sniffer dogs and robots are used to locate the tunnels, while elite units are operating on the front line, while bulldozers are used to destroy tunnel entrances. But the tunnels will remain as an advantage for Hamas, who can launch ambushes without having to go outside into the street. If urban fighting is three-dimensional with attacks coming from in front, behind, and above, in Gaza there are also attacks from below. And it is more complicated because tunnels are near schools and hospitals, and hostages are also there, which is why the urban warfare will be long and slow in Gaza. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.